INFP and ENFPs. I'm sorry for not uploading for a long while. It's pretty difficult setting up and recording, but this time in this video I've decided not to use a script. Yes, believe it or not, I used a script for the previous videos, and I believe that because of that it might have sounded too articulate or like as if it was rehearsed before. And I figured things might come more naturally if a script isn't involved and things just simply come out of my mouth. So today we're going to talk about the topic of the INFP and the ENFP friendship. Most intuitive feeling types will eventually find an ENFP in our lives, but we're going to discuss how would the INFP find an ENFP. Well, when I discuss this stuff, I'm going to be using an example which is my ENFP friend, to be able to relate to the different ideas of how the friendship works and simply how an ENFP's mind works. I think most INFPs and ENFPs tend to meet mostly within the creative arts industry because, like INFPs, there's an overwhelming amount of ENFPs that are involved in creative arts, especially theatre. In this case, I've met my ENFP friend through music, so that's like one of the examples. But it doesn't have to be through music. They can just happen to just stumble across each other, because INFPs and ENFPs are quite meant to be, right? And we are not using the Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love example in this video. The main characteristics of ENFPs tend to be humor, their extroversion, the people-oriented mindset, and their uniqueness. They tend to want to express themselves just as much as an INFP would, but this time they prefer to express it outwardly rather than inwardly. The thing is, an INFP wants authenticity. ENFP also wants authenticity, but that way, like ENFJs, they would want to build a crowd with that authenticity. So because of that, ENFPs tend to be a little bit more action-oriented when it comes to standing up for their morals and values. But what makes this sort of friendship special is when an INFP and ENFP's morals can sort of connect. An ENFP can help voice an INFP's morals, but an INFP's soft nature can help ENFP sort of dive down a little bit when they need to. ENFPs can take things pretty far when it comes to what they believe in, and will often take parts in big communities. ENFPs thrive in communities, but eventually they can get too deep into this community-driven mindset so much that they often lose a sense of individuality and identity. And what sort of separates these two as well is that INFPs loves identity, but we don't want to share it around. ENFPs absolutely want to share it around. So it's common that ENFPs will often get into fashion or often get into performing, and especially theatre, where they can outwardly express different complex human emotions, as ENFPs also tend to be very sensitive and empathetic people. So what are the benefits of an INFP and ENFP friendship? INFPs can teach ENFPs to sort of focus on themselves and not let the outside world control them. As individuals ENFPs like and want to be, their extroverted nature can tend to make them want to self-consciously imitate those around them. And they want to really fit in, but at the same time, they want to be unique. So when they are around someone way more unique than them, they will feel the need to want to imitate them to be able to feel unique, which isn't the case, which is why ENFPs can feel extremely dissociated. INFPs, however, don't do this because we prefer to keep things in, but we'll only let things let out if we have checked it in our minds. So which makes us less likely to subconsciously mirror the people around us in order to fit in. We just tend to don't, because we just we've already created our sense of identity and we focus on it 24/7, and that expression is very more private. But one of the big benefits is INFPs and ENFPs are really good at creating creative solutions. When there are any problems in friendships or anything around them in life, they can often work together in a way that tends to be very similar, and they tend to look at different ways which things could work for them both, but also being sort of fun. ENFPs love fun. From personal experience, I find that ENFPs are extremely spontaneous people. Of course, because there's P in a type, but I'm serious. As an INFP, I never thought I'd see anyone more spontaneous than me until I found ENFPs. And it certainly adds on to it that they want to take it socially, which eventually makes them somewhat even more risk-taking than INFPs. But ENFPs like the thrill of it. They like the thrill of meeting new people, like the thrill of sort of pushing the boundaries a little bit. And you can see that often in their humor, hence why they often like dark humor. They like to morally challenge others and sort of bring everyone in one room to sort of learn one thing about each other, but to also question each other. ENFPs are extremely curious people, especially when it comes to what they believe the world believes in and what themselves perceive it as. And because ENFPs tend to take themselves into more outward level, it tends to help INFPs sometimes and sort of, just loosen up a bit. While INFP and NFPs are quite opposite, they're also very similar people, which is why often these kind of friendships can be very productive. I think some would say NFP is technically an INFP who is more healthier, though that is certainly not the case. You can find a load of unhealthy ENFPs, and although the loop is a lot more different than INFPs, I think it's easier for an INFP to understand an ENFP loop than some other types would because of their introverted feeling trait. But it's also the ENFP and INFP's intuition that sort of binds things together. They perceive the world in the same way with their intuitive feeling. And what the heck does that mean? It means instead of picking out all the different details from around them, they think about the overall image of what's around them. They don't think about ... they think about the whole picture. And it also opens them up to different possibilities. So when you see an INFP and ENFP working in a team, they're not working on making sure everything gets done in a certain time frame. They just want to make sure they have a good picture of what exactly they want, how it could be presented, and how things could look like. I do tend to notice ENFPs sometimes are more visual, while INFPs are more in terms of writing. But that's not always the case. I find that it's also ENFPs love to write different things, and they tend to be a little bit more around the river than INFP would. From personal experience, my ENFP friend explores possibilities way more than I do. And I don't know if that's due to comfort zone or just simply the fact that he prefers to think more outside the box or is more inspired. But I think it's also one of these examples of how much more spontaneous ENFP can definitely seem to us INFPs. And we often get confused by that because we still have different natures in a way. We INFPs tend to see ENFPs as more bigger parts of ourselves, which is what makes this relationship actually so important. And from personal experience, ENFPs tend to be huge ambiverts. I know, right? Like, people-oriented and ambivert? What? It's also why you will see an INFJ and an ENFP really get along. They both tend to have their ambiversion come across, and if you meet an ENFP who's ambiverted and you're ambiverted, it's often sometimes messy, but also very harmonizing. Because an INFP will know exactly when an ENFP is using their FI, which in fact is ENFP's auxiliary function. And sometimes the ENFP will know when INFP is sort of discluding everyone around them and will often get them off their feet and moving, which brings the INFP out of their comfort zone, but it also helps them feel comfortable because of how similar these two types are, and it also can be a lot more relieving for an INFP. But what are the downsides to the INFP-ENFP friendship? Hold on, sir. Did not choose not to make friends with an ENFP yet. There are loads of benefits, and the disadvantages are very situational. It always depends on the mental state of both parties, and it all depends on circumstance. If you're an INFP, any ENFP that you find in your life, go and be friends with them. Because of how similar they are, if they are both not in the right mindset, they can often over-validate each other, which I think some would believe is a good thing, because I think everyone wants a friend to sit next to when feeling sad, and someone pretty much feels the same. But in this case, an ENFP and INFPs sharing FI can often sort of breed a huge bubble of validation that in turn doesn't really fix anything. If they are both going through a hard time, nothing's going to stop them from going out, because they go through similar thought processes because of their FI function. But it tends to work a little bit differently, and it might be difficult for both sides to really understand. If a non-FP is not really ambiverted and therefore very introverted, they might not understand the realms of extroversion so much, because it is a completely different way of thinking and that they never usually think about. INFPs don't usually tend to want to think about people, we just tend to want to think about ourselves, which is why it's often said that INFPs can seem self-centered. But ENFPs can also be called self-centered because they draw their attention to what everyone else perceives them as, and it kind of threatens them. And if an ENFP is rejected by a group of people for them being who they aren't gonna feel what INFPs do, and INFPs will feel sort of broken, but also a sense of, I don't care anymore. I'm going to keep doing this because it's part of who I am, it's what I feel is right. But with an ENFP, they will think, right, so this is not what I expect, this is not what I even want. So they're going to often change parts of themselves in order to go through this. So when an ENFP and INFP are both sad, they're going to have different ways of expectations and for themselves and other people in the world in general. But they can also connect with their idealism. That's literally all the disadvantages I can think of. Well, I think that is it. Find yourself an ENFP friend.